Hello again YouTube, Pan here, and first things first, yes I know that piece needs some work. I'm working on it. Also a little note on scheduling. In the early days of this channel a few weeks ago I was doing really well at getting 2 videos a week out. That slipped a little bit, mostly just because March is a really busy month for me, it turns out. Just way too much debauchery and bacchanalia, so hopefully I'll be able to keep it to one a week at least. And we'll see where we go from there. What's in the purse this time? And this time we have something very special. We have a proof half sovereign. Now you can see just by having a quick look that this is a 2003, so this is very much a modern era proof sovereign, which means that the colour of it is, well, quite coppery. And so before I want to go any further, I want to have a little talk about how unusual that actually is. So, who's up for a little electrochemistry refresher? So, most of you will have learnt at school the Rutherford model of the atom. This is a model in which we have our nucleus, comprising protons and neutrons, and then we have electrons kind of whizzing around the outside. It's not a perfect model, but it's good enough for explaining what we're going to be looking at this time. So, we have our Rutherford nuclear atom. And what we get is we get electrons being added. Basically they start off in lower shells, and then the more electrons you add, the further and further out they're pushed. This is a phenomenon in quantum mechanics due to the Pauli exclusion principle, but let's not get into that. On a practical level, what this means is that we have the nucleus, and then we have basically a series of suborbitals moving outwards, which get progressively filled with electrons. So the innermost shell here has 2 electrons, the next one out has 8, and they tend to form pairs, and these are important for covalent bonding, which we're not going to be talking about this time. So, gold, silver and copper all sit in what's known as group 11 of the periodic table. What this means is that they all have a very, very similar structure and very, very similar chemical properties. So, what group 11 means is that they have a completely full, what's called a d suborbital, this layer here, and then one more free electron on the outside. Now, by having a complete suborbital, this basically means that this electron on the outside is somewhat shielded from the positive charge of the nucleus. Electrons are charged negative, protons in the nucleus are charged positive. And so what this tends to mean is that these sorts of metals will sort of form a lattice where they just kind of all sit together with the ions next to each other, and then these single electrons on the outside tend to dissociate from an individual atom and just sort of smoosh out together in kind of this C, and this is part of what gives metals, particularly metals in group 11, their tremendous electrical conductivity. Now, having an arrangement like this, so having a completely full outer shell, is what you get with things like noble gases, like say helium or neon, and they're very unreactive, so getting them to stick to anything is kind of tough. What this also means then is by having just a single electron on the outside that doesn't form any proper covalent bonds, it also means that the intermolecular forces joining the different atoms of the metal together are relatively weak in the grand scheme of things. This also goes some way to explaining the softness and ductility and malleability of all these metals, copper, gold and silver. So why am I boring you with this? Well, because 2 of the metals in group 11 are actually quite unusual. Both copper and gold have got a visible colour. And this is rarer than you might think. In fact, of all the transition metals, I think they're the only 2 that have any colour, well, what is colour? Colour is an electromagnetic radiation that comes from electrons transitioning between different energy states. And so the energy transition to excite something from the d suborbital here up into the next orbital up is characteristic of the individual element. And for copper and gold, this transition between this shell and the next shell out, actually occurs at a visible wavelength. And so this is why, unlike say silver, aluminium, magnesium, a huge number of other metals, gold and copper actually have a really, really clear colour. So let's go back to our proof half sovereign, and I'll explain a little about why I bothered boring you with this. And for that, I'm going to have to transition over to my macro filter. And so here we have Queenie in all her glory. So obviously proof coins, is many people will tell you, are coins that are finished to a very, very high standard. And I've just been, this is actually my first proof coin, and in fact my first half sovereign of the modern era. And one of the things I'm really, really liking about it is that whilst most of the background is done in this sort of matte, shiny finish, the letters and the portrait of the Queen herself are all done in almost kind of a slightly kind of frosted texture. And so what that means is when you get the lighting right like this, the entire background just appears dark and it almost feels like it's kind of floating, and that really, really helps kind of make the entire image pop and just really, really accentuates everything. And it's just, well, I don't even have particular words for it, it's just incredibly pretty. So the reason I was boring you with a discussion of the different elements in Group 11 is that this, along with most modern sovereigns and half sovereigns, is a composite. It's 22 karat gold, which means that it's mostly gold, but then there's a little bit of something else in it. And compared to, say, this sovereign from George V, which you can see has got kind of a much more yellowy kind of texture, the modern sovereigns appear a lot darker and a lot kind of browner. And the simple reason for this is that whilst the previous sovereigns and half sovereigns had a variety of different metals that might be in them, modern sovereigns and half sovereigns are gold and copper, and the copper has a really, really surprisingly strong impact on the colour and the appearance of them. So much so that, apart from the kind of very, very high quality shininess of it, and apart from the fact that it has the Pistrucci St. George and the dragon on the reverse, you could imagine people mistaking these for pennies quite easily, especially given that they're very, very similar in size. Hold on for a moment, I'm going to very carefully flip it over to the other side. And I have to say that it's this side that really, really kind of seals the deal for me. So obviously I've had various portraits of various versions of the Pistrucci St. George and the Dragon on other coins that I've had, but having a proof version of it so you can actually see what it's like when it's fresh out of the mint really does bring it home that it's a very, very impressive piece. I mean, just look at the muscles rippling all over that. And again, the proof finish just really, really makes the entire thing stand out so marvellously. I also got this off eBay at, frankly, a disproportionately good price for a proof coin. So I'm extremely happy with what I got it for, and so it means that I'm even more than I was kind of pondering with the George V half sovereign. I'm kind of wondering, is this one worth sending off for grading? But then I remember it's a modern one, so there's going to be quite a few of them, and I can even see now that there is maybe a couple of little specks on this. Like, you can see next to the hoof there's something. So I think, again, rather than getting kind of, too kind of caught up in the excitement of what could possibly be, with something that doesn't really matter to me that much, instead I'm just going to keep this one and just sort of enjoy it as an incredibly pretty example of what a very carefully minted proof coin can be. I was going to give you more details, but to be honest, this one's just turned into a bit of a coin porn episode. And again, we've got that slight gill effect like I noticed on the shark coin. So maybe it's not a shark coin, maybe that's just, you know, part of the Queen's heritage. So where you can see all the details on the crown and the hair, that really, really stands out. And don't forget, this is a very small coin. Like, this is smaller than a 1p piece. So there you go. 2003 proof half sovereign. Very pretty coin.